Nohra in layman's terms. I am very excited about today's guest, Gerard Filitti, because when I was doing my prep, I didn't have to, you're a Renaissance man and we're just going to open-ended talk. So I like this. And of course, our audience is people who are very busy, don't have time to get into wonkish issues like I do and probably like you do. So we just try to make it nice and easy and simple, and we take it from there. So welcome to the show, and you start where you want, and I promise you I will have enough interjections that we will make this very, very good.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course.
I think what we've seen this week, one of the things that I've talked about most this week has been, of course, Charlie Kirk. And what we're seeing now is a fallout of that, both on university campuses, but in society in general. And I think so many people want to know what comes next, what we can do about it, where we go from here, and the implications on radicalization into the schools that's so important to address.
Yeah, it's a tragedy. And with my background, I grew up until I was 15 in Lebanon. And obviously, in a lot of places in the world, assassinations are common, but not in America, not my America. And I think for this to have happened was just very, very shocking and disturbing. So, again, we keep praying. I did the rosary yesterday for his family and for him. And you're right. What happens next is a great question. And I know you've been on a whole bunch of shows talking about this. So what do you think? What can we, again, people that are going to watch this show, they're probably as upset as we are, but they don't pay attention to all the details. So yeah, what do you think happens next? And what are you feeling out there from talking to people?
I think that what happens next is that we do start paying attention to the details. Over the last week, I've called it, and I've fallen into the trap myself of calling it political violence. But the more I think about it, it's not really political violence, it's ideological violence. Kirk wasn't targeted because he was a candidate running for office or because he had one specific political view. It was this whole ideology of hate, of this anti-democratic radicalization that's been taking place. And when you look at this, for all accounts and purposes, this normal middle-class kid from a purportedly good family who had all the opportunities in the world, you have to wonder what happened to him that he went this far, that he became ideologically motivated to kill someone. And that's really why we have to start taking a better look at what's going on in our schools, because a lot of this starts there. Now, you're from Lebanon, so you know that there's a lot that goes on in the school that shapes the way kids feel, the way that kids behave, the views that they hold. They're taught certain things. They're taught a perception of good and evil that may not even be factual. And then they're set free in a society where we have social media that reinforces this, where we have sometimes foreign governments that reinforce specific hatreds and that are meant to really destroy our democratic values. And kids don't realize this because they're slowly being indoctrinated. They go away from what their parents taught them, and they're starting to believe wholesale what they learn from teachers who have an agenda, or from social media, influencers, celebrities who also have an agenda. So all of a sudden you have a normal kid, which could be any kid, it could be your kid, that you bring them up right, but when you're not paying attention, they're becoming radicalized, they're being indoctrinated into hate. So I think the next step where we go from here is we have to wake up to that reality. We have to know what's going on in our schools, what we've all seen on college campuses for the last 2 years after October 7, the hate targeting Jews, the hate targeting American values. That's not just in college, that starts earlier. So parents really need to wake up to this, because what happened to Charlie Kirk, that can happen again. And it's in our hands to know what's going on in school and to try to fix it.
Yeah, somebody asked me yesterday on a radio show what happened, and I said they took over education, K to senior in college, and it's ironic. I used to, I went to school, you went to school, went to high school here, and most kids don't listen, which is a good thing in retrospect. However, if enough listen with the indoctrination, we're going to have things like this happen, and that's what really concerns me. Is that it's such a one-way street. I even hear from private schools where the indoctrination happens. So no one is immune.
If anything, from people I talk to, it's actually worse in private schools. Parents think that they're paying for a good education, but they have so little control over what's actually being taught. When you've got a kid in public school, you can go to school board meetings, you can ask for the curriculum, you can push for changes, you can see what the lesson plans are, and there are usually policies in place, or at least there's federal law and state law that is meant to protect you. But in private schools, you've got a contract, and that's it. And the schools can do pretty much whatever they want, and you have very little say in what your kids are learning other than to pull them out of that school. And let's face it, no parent does. You send your kid to a private school for a reason, to give them a leg up, to give them an education that you can't find somewhere else. And you're reluctant to take them out of it and jeopardize them getting into a good college or having a good degree. So you kind of accept it. If anything, private schools are worse, and I think parents need to do even more there. It's a heavier lift to say, wait a second, we're paying for this. We don't want this propaganda.
So you're right, and in private schools, money talks. So I guess we can just vote with our feet. So what short, medium term? How do we address this issue? Because as you said, God forbid it could happen again. There's a lot of indoctrination taking place, and it took 30 years for us to get here. My teachers, if I remember, they were kind of on the left, but they weren't radical left. They were just, one of my teachers ended up becoming a California congressman and so on and so forth. And he was probably center left. So what do we do in the short term? What do we do in the medium term?
Well, the short term part of it is we need parental involvement. When I was in school, it was already in this period where the indoctrination was starting, but it wasn't that bad. But it was bad enough. I had a social studies teacher who taught us, as a matter of fact, that Jesus Christ was the world's first communist. And the next day, the principal's office had a line of parents outside of it, all of them concerned that this was the garbage that was being taught in school. So that was something that's remedied. The difference today is this is happening even more and on a much deeper scale, but parents aren't aware of it. Part of it is we're busy. We have social media. We're on our phones. Our kids are on our phones. So we don't have that same dinner time discussion about what's going on in the classroom. So we have that responsibility now to catch up, to know what's going on, and to address it. Because sometimes schools are actually willing to listen. It's taxpayer influence. It's the power of people getting together and demanding change. But we have to do that. So number one is waking up and actually learning what your kids are learning, figuring out what the curriculum's being taught, but not just the curriculum. The curriculum is great. It tells you we're learning about nationalism, but it doesn't tell you that what they're learning about nationalism is how Marxist-Leninism is the only way to establish a proper foundation for a country. That's the lesson plan. That's the teaching material. Parents have to know. Parents have to be involved. The other part is, well, two other parts, really. One of them is we need to go after the teacher unions. These things have become politicized. They're not looking out for teachers. They're not looking out for students. They're getting people to vote for Zoran Mamdani. They've got teachers showing up with the most Marxist mayoral candidate possible and saying, hey, this is the guy we support. How is that anything to do with education? So we only have to see what the legal underpinnings of these unions are and go after them. They shouldn't be getting money from teachers, from hardworking teachers, and then be using that for politics. And the third part is we need to start imposing consequences on bad conduct. When we see teachers that are going out of line, we can't just reward them and say, keep teaching. There need to be consequences. When we see kids that are misbehaving in school, they need consequences too. If you're discriminating, if you're bullying, if you're harassing, it's not just, oh, it's a different political opinion. No, it's wrong. And when you impose consequences, then kids start to learn that they have to behave better. So ultimately, it all comes down to the same thing. We have to be more active and involved. We can't just trust the system to work.
I think that's a great conclusion, and it started with COVID, where people actually were watching and seeing what their kids were being taught, and I think it continues now. So to your point, I think we all have to get involved again. Go to the school board meetings, run for school board, have an impact, because this is not going in the right direction at all. If you believe in America and the American dream, so I think that's great advice here for us. So. What else? Again, I looked at your extensive resume. So you went to law school, but tell me about the law piece that you practiced. Then we have to talk about the book. And oh my gosh, I don't know how we're going to be able to fit all that in. But
Well, I went to law school because I realized that even though I was pre-med, that was not the future that I necessarily wanted. So I couldn't cut it, and I decided to do something easier, which seems to be law. Because a history degree doesn't get you far in this world unless you're applying to be a manager at Starbucks. So I went to law school at Michigan. I've been a scholar of the Middle East even before then, but I've maintained an interest in that. And I practiced as a litigator for many, many years before becoming more narrowly focused on counterterrorism finance litigation. So going after the banks that finance Hezbollah, going after the banks that transfer money on behalf of Iran and other terrorist organizations. And I did that for a number of years. And from there went into civil rights. The Lawfare Project is a nonprofit based in New York City that focuses especially on the civil rights of the Jewish people, because it is the largest still underserved minority community. And we're seeing that, I think, especially in the last 2 years, many people have opened their eyes to the problems that we're seeing. And this really is a civil rights issue. Anti-Semitism, just like racism, it's a legal issue. It's not a matter of opinion. You're entitled to live your life and have the same rights as everyone else without being targeted for your beliefs. So really, that's something, a message that we fight in the courtroom and through activism to pursue. And somewhere in all of that, I had the opportunity to write a book, a thriller about stopping a terrorist attack, which I think is even timely today when we see the drone warfare that's playing out in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and elsewhere. But it really brings together why we as a country need to be awake and alert to everything that we're dealing with on the international scene.
Yes, so we're going to come back to a lot of these things. But you said med school, so I was a venture capitalist in the life sciences. So I spent my whole career investing in medical things, and you're always about 10 years ahead of the medical community when you do what we do, because you see them before they get approved. So that was a lot of fun. So it's one thing we do have in common. And then so yes, I agree with you on the path you took with regards to the civil rights. Because when people think civil rights, of course, the first thing that comes to their mind is Martin Luther King and so on and so forth. But there is a group that gets left behind, and historically has been left behind. So how did you make that decision to actually get involved with regards to Jewish rights?
I was representing a lot of American service members who were killed, who were injured, or whose family members were killed in terrorist attacks in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that of all the combat deaths that we saw in Iraq especially, they were not just fighting an enemy, an organized army, or just insurgents. A lot of these attacks were directed by Iran. These were terrorist organizations that were funded and directed by Iran, that were committing targeted attacks, taking hundreds of American lives. And working with victims of terrorism, it's impossible not to also work with Jewish victims of terrorism. That is, when you think of, unfortunately, when you think of Israel these days, you think of terrorist attacks. You think of October 7. That's always been the case, that they've always had to be on the defense of these acts of violence. But no one in the U.S., not too many people in the U.S. actively spoke up about that in the legal sense. There's always political support for the state of Israel, but there hasn't been this concerted effort to say, wait a second, this is not political. This is about people having basic civil rights, basic human rights, the right to live and worship and work in freedom and in peace. So I think this was a large underserved community, and it ties into more traditional conservative values, or rather what used to be traditional liberal values of democracy, of being able to have your speech and exercise your speech without being attacked and silenced for it. And when you're fighting for the civil rights of a minority group like the Jewish people, you're also effectively fighting for American values. You're fighting for American democratic values to protect these freedoms that we all hold dear, but we're at risk of losing when we have certain governments or certain administrations that infringe on them. So this is why it's an important fight, because we're all in it together. It's not just Jew hatred is about the Jewish people, but it's not just a Jewish issue. It's part of this whole radicalization campaign that we're all dealing with.
First of all, it's admirable work. Thank you. So from your last name, I assume you're Italian. Does that mean Catholic, or?
Yeah, that means, yeah.
I'm a Lebanese Christian. One of the guests I had previously, David Grantham, was an intelligence officer in Iraq and Kuwait. And he exactly in his book talks about how Iran, most of the injuries, the IEDs injuries, were all driven by Iran. And remember, there was a bounty on American soldiers that the Iranians were paying for. So this whole thing about, and then of course we spoke about Hezbollah as well, which what I ended up with a couple of guests talking, and of course I at 15, unfortunately, I had to fight their grandparents literally across the line. That was the Hezbollah's grandparents and the PLO. So I know them fairly well. And they use the US as an ATM machine.
Yeah.
Back to your banking work, right? So in a way, we're protected. In a way, we're not, because I know they have sleeper cells here. There's no question. Look at Dearborn and all the crazy stuff that's happening over there. But so tell me about that work you did with the banks and trying to, with the whole financing of a bunch of terrorist organizations.
Well, that's just it. Going back to what you said, when we talk about IEDs and improvised explosive devices, sometimes we have this image that they're these crude devices that people just whip together with something that's explosive. But in fact, a lot of these IEDs were EFPs, were explosively foreign penetrators. These were high-tech devices that were manufactured in Iran and used by terrorist organizations taken into Iraq to do more damage. So these could pierce through a tank. These could pierce through an armored personnel carrier. And that's why they were so devastating and targeted so many Americans, because it was really the Iranian government that was behind it. And they have used America like a piggy bank, not just laundering money through banks in New York and going after the banks. It's fascinating because you even see communications, especially among European banks, that are making fun of America and its sanctions regime. They're even saying explicitly they don't care about sanctions. They just want to do business. They don't care that it's with Iran. They know that these are bad people. They're going to transact business anyway. Thankfully, with more tightening of sanctions and better policy, we've been able to strangle that a lot more. But even beyond that, what people may not realize is there are Hezbollah cells in the United States. There are Hezbollah cells that have operated here. They've laundered money through a network back to Iran. Some of it even had to do, and there was an amazing project that the DEA did, that you could see used car dealerships were being used in the United States to launder, to transport cars through South America, through Africa, getting trunk full of cash that then went into Iran through Hezbollah and its different agents. So we have these domestic groups in America that are actually Hezbollah. We've had groups affiliated with terrorist organizations, with the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an entirely different set of evil that's been operating within the United States for decades. And once in a while we crack down on them, but ultimately they're still here. And even today, well, not under President Trump, but under President Biden, we had people caught at the southern border who were members of designated foreign terrorist organizations. So the threat in America is very real.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The same way we were talking about how we need to pay attention to the extreme left, I think we start. The whole Muslim Brotherhood gig is up. People are beginning to pay attention finally, and we're realizing how behind the scenes insidious they are. And I was again talking to someone last week, and the problem we have is that the U.S. Constitution and Sharia law cannot coexist. It's one or the other. So just like your grandparents did, just like my parents did, we come here, we assimilate, and we don't talk about anything else that we've done or believe in before. This particular group is having a hard time. And what do you think about that? Because I think I saw they were trying to do a Sharia law somewhere in Texas or something. It's like, no, not this goes. I mean, to our friends on the left, I would like to say separation. You tell me this all the time.
We've become tolerant of everyone who is intolerant of us. And over the years, America is no longer a melting pot where you assimilate, but it's when we are expected to just accept the fact that other people will live their own lives and according to their own values. Not just Texas. Have you been to Dearborn, Michigan lately? Have you seen police patches with Arabic on them? I mean, this is where we've gotten to in America, where we're not a melting pot. We're not just mindful of other cultures, but we're actively allowing people who hate our democratic values to abuse them in order to establish themselves and start the makings of a radical ideological theocracy. I mean, that's what radical Islam is. That's Islamist philosophy. That's Iran. That's the Ayatollahs. They're trying to establish that here. And in our open-mindedness and the open-mindedness of America's far left, we've allowed them to get away with it. We allowed themselves to establish themselves here. Even on college campuses, we're supposed to have tolerance for them to speak and to be heard and to get their viewpoints across. But the moment we try to criticize that or say, wait a second, how about our democratic values? We all of a sudden become intolerant, so we can't speak. And this goes back in a way to how we started with Charlie Kirk. We shouldn't be afraid of speaking the truth in a public square. But yet we have become, because consequences have not been imposed on those who are here to destroy us. They're being imposed on people who are here to protect our democracy.
People who want to keep the American dream alive, people who want to keep our values and our morals the same. Yeah, but I think it's, again, there's another awakening that's taking place with regards to this particular issue as well. And of course, your work on behalf of the Jewish population plays right into that from my perspective. So tell me about some of the things that, of course, there's the campus, right? Jewish students at Columbia, there's no reason why they should feel threatened. So what are you doing this kind of work as far as representing clients like this? Is that?
Yeah, we've sued Columbia University, Cooper Union, Carnegie Mellon. We have lawsuits pending against some of these really bad universities. DePaul University in Chicago, 2 Jewish students were beaten up, were attacked in a hate crime by people who came onto campus to attack them, in part because the universities do nothing to protect these students. But that also plays into the issues we have with progressive policing in liberal states. In Chicago, one of the attackers, the police know who he is. They have not arrested him or charged him yet. In New York City, I've worked with victims of hate crimes who the police does nothing because they know that the prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, very liberal, very progressive, will do nothing. These charges are not pursued. I had to go to the federal government, and this during Biden's administration, to get the Justice Department to pursue charges because the city of New York didn't want to do anything about it. They don't want to upset their voting bloc, so they don't touch these cases. And we see this on college campuses. Look at Columbia. You have campus buildings being illegally occupied by students who barricade themselves in. They're wearing masks. They're committing acts of violence. Eventually, some of them got arrested, but none of these cases have gone anywhere. This tolerance for criminal behavior, when you see it especially targeting a minority people, we should all be offended. But in these progressive cities, nothing is done. So in part, it's the radicalization that leads to it, but it's also our tolerance, our failure to impose consequences.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I used to hear the saying, today we'll take on Saturday and tomorrow we'll take on Sunday. So, you're fighting for Saturday, which means you're also fighting for Sunday. And I think that's something that people should know about because it is an agenda and it's getting embedded, unfortunately, in our universities, as we spoke before. But I have an interesting question, which I think you and I, as people who care about the Jewish people in our hearts sincerely, it's interesting that the voting patterns are still for Democrats. And at some point, when will that change? I had an interview with an Israeli reporter about this about a year ago. But when does that start changing and will it change? Because the analogy that we made was that it was a good analogy he made for me. He said, look, it's like football teams in Europe. If you grow up being for Barcelona, and your grandparents were for Barcelona, and your parents were for Barcelona, and your kids are Barcelona, you're not going to change. I'm like, yeah, but Barcelona did not do October 7th, Anyway, so.
Well, I think the voting patterns are starting to change a little. We saw that in New York City with a presidential election where more Jews than expected or in the past have voted Republican voted for Donald Trump. And it's not, I don't see it as a reflection on his policies towards Israel as much as I see, and I work with people who are, classical liberals, who are traditional liberals, who have voted for Bill Clinton, for Barack Obama, but they're seeing that they're not being represented adequately when it comes to their identity. They're the people who have, marched for every social justice cause, but they're seeing that now when their rights are under attack, no one is standing up for them. So they're opening their eyes slowly and steadily and saying, hey, wait a second, we're voting for the wrong people. The Republicans, we may not agree with a lot of their value propositions, but on the other hand, they are there consistently for our democratic rights, for our democratic values. So I am seeing that shift. It's not as significant or noticeable as we may want it to be, but it is a slow progression as people are waking up to this fact.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be very important for so many reasons, starting with, of course, self-preservation. I don't understand, as you said, some of the most courageous people in the civil rights work were Jewish people. They were down in the South. They were walking in the front of the line. They were doing everything they could. And when they needed someone after October 7th, it was you and I that showed up, and not their friends and the people they were donating to their campaigns. And it's just heartbreaking in a way. And I'm glad your work is actually waking people up to this, because it's very, anti-Semitism is an ugly thing, and I strongly believe it's the canary in a coal mine for societies at large. And every time I see the Colombia things happening, I get very upset, because it's usually just the beginning. And even now, everything gets blamed. It's always Israel that did it. So again, great work. And, please, build on that a little bit also. So,
It goes back to education and the indoctrination. I hate to say it, but we're old enough to not have been indoctrinated into this oppressor-oppressed narrative, into this anti-Western narrative that kids are learning in school. That's what DEI is. That's why it's so bad. It's not about celebrating that other people are different. It's teaching that there are oppressed people, and that unless you're one of the oppressed people, you are an oppressor. That's what's driving the black community to go inside and protest for the Palestinian cause. That's what's driving other minority communities, because you have these kids who are being indoctrinated. And it's not a Jewish thing. This is an anti-American thing. This is, it threatens the Jewish people now, but it threatens all of us collectively as a society, because this is, if you go down to its roots, this is the essence of Marxism. You drive apart a country by pitting people against people, and when you have that complete disaster, into the mess steps socialism, and everyone embraces it because there's nothing left. So this is really the insidious nature of it, and this is why we all need to be alert to it, because what we're dealing with, it's not just about the Jewish people. This is an anti-American issue. This is an issue of indoctrinating people to destroy our country.
Yeah, it's so true. I don't know why there's this hierarchy of oppressed, and that's how they see the world, right? It's like, who's the most oppressed all the way down, and then that's who they support blindly. That's the first thing. It's crazy. The second thing is, Marxism can't work here with the workers. They tried, it failed. So now they're going to use race. It's Marxism, but using race as a divider, or whatever they can, socioeconomic, anything they can use to divide. But it's still the same playbook. It's the Marxist playbook. And unfortunately, a lot of the people around are the famous useful idiots. And I think that's I use that term a lot, and I think it should be used more and more. So let's jump to the book. I'm going to buy it, so don't spoil it for me. But tell me about, just you mentioned it a little bit, but tell me a little more.
Well, it's fiction, and I wish I could say it's based on real life events, but it's inspired by them. It starts with a terrorist attack in Washington, D.C., and through the course of participating in an investigation, a lawyer with some dark connections or past connections to the government begins to unravel what's part of a larger conspiracy. And I think that's what's the interesting part about it, because it plays into how terrorism works, how terrorist cells work, while adding in a bit of excitement and romance and all those other good things that you need in order to keep different demographics happy. But ultimately, I think it's eye-opening for people who really get into it, who see this as, wow, this could be real, this could be ripped from the headlines. And even though I wrote this almost 10 years ago, I think the topics and the material is just as valid today and just as fresh today. And I strongly encourage people, if you want to read that you can't put down after you get past the first few pages, buy Frozen Tide, buy a copy.
Good. Well, I'll encourage people to do that as well, and I will too. And I'll at some point, if you can sign it for me, I'd appreciate that. But if you did it 10 years ago, that's amazingly prescient, because this is very relevant today, from what I read. It's, the sleeper cells, the bigger issues, the government uh, sponsored terrorism, whether it's North Korea or Iran, or So it's actually that was pretty good to catch it that early.
And
So go ahead.
the funny thing is, and without giving too much away, but it also has to do with the southern border and how these terrorists actually get here and what alliances they have. So really, it also shows that what we're dealing with today is absolutely not a new issue. We've been having this problem for a long time. And if anything, if you read the book, you can see what might happen if we don't have a Donald Trump in the White House, if we don't have someone who is actually taking care of our border, things could be much worse. So I'm glad that we're not in that position, and I'm glad that this is still a work of fiction. I hate for this to become nonfiction, but it really, I mean, these are the issues of our time.
Yeah. So then, of course, I'm going to put you on the spot. So what should we be looking for 10 years from now to worry
What we
about?
should be looking for 10 years from now is unfortunately more of the same. I think that unfortunately we may be learning our lessons in the short term, but we also have to be mindful that China is not the friendliest country towards us. And if we're not careful on what we give away or what commitments we make, now we may very well end up in a completely different world where our economy, we don't have the trading partners that we used to, and that we're all just relying on China for everything. So even if it's not a military issue, it will be a big economic issue of our time. I think the Middle East will still be an issue 10 years from now. I think Russia will still be an issue 10 years from now. I think we will see a different Europe that is starting to swing back because they've realized that their excesses have gone, especially with migration, especially with importing radical Islamists to live there. I think they realize they've gone too far, and it will swing back to a better situation. But I do think that the same issues that we're dealing with now, a lot of them we will still have in 10 years.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it'd be interesting to watch Europe if they turn around, and if they turn around on time. My pop psychology history is that the Europeans felt so guilty about colonialism that they just allowed this to happen to them, and now they're beginning to realize that again it's not compatible with who we are as Western civilization, even though they're very secular. I think that's one of the problems with Europe is that their secularism made them not pay attention to what's actually happening to them, and this is across the whole spectrum. So we'll see how that plays out. And you're right about China. They want to do another world order. They want to be the ones in the center. Speaking of the Middle East, and again because of the work that you do, um, you and I are both conservative, so there's but we're also honest. What do you think of the work that's being done right now from the Trump administration in the Middle East, Israel, Gaza, etc.? Do you have an opinion?
Look, I think that President Trump is consistent in supporting Israel, and I think generally speaking, that's a good thing. I also think that Israel did not learn the lessons that America learned in Afghanistan and Iraq. And the longer they spend prosecuting this war, which is very justifiable, which is, I mean, let's not forget what they're fighting. They're fighting global terrorism. But the longer they spend fighting this war, the longer it takes them to achieve their objectives, the more opinion goes against them and the more difficult it will be to stabilize the Middle East. Because if you want to do that, you need Abraham Accords, you need an expansion of Arab acceptance. But the longer the war lasts and the more public opinion turns against Israel, the more difficult that will be to happen. So I think President Trump is very right in standing up for America's allies, standing up for what's right. But I also think that this war needs to be, there needs to be an exit strategy. It can't just be, we keep going. Israel needs to put together and say, this is how we envision reconstruction period, and involve the Arab countries, involve Qatar, involve the UAE, involve Saudi Arabia, involve all the states that have an interest in this. And I think that's what Trump has wanted to do since he took office. And if that's the way things go, it will be a new order in the Middle East. It'll be a peace and stability, and Iran will be further marginalized. But this war does need to end for that to happen.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a seesaw. Like you say, our vision and the president's vision is amazing, and it's based on prosperity for everyone, so that people don't kill each other. But then last week there was a summit. It's supposed to be called the Arabic Islamic Summit, and Iran was there, which is like, I guess that's the Islamic part. But in Qatar, which they had bombed about year and a half to 2 years ago. So we're still fighting an uphill battle there. But I think the president's message of positivity and prosperity is the way to go. But we need some kind of a stick, and I you know we'd like to see more of that. But I agree with you. I think the vision is the way to go. So it could be a pretty interesting place for all of us to visit. I was lucky I got to go to Jerusalem last year, and as a Christian, it was just an amazing experience. Have you been?
I have been. It's I've been to many countries in the Middle East, and I just love it. It's going back to our roots. You can see, you can see the Bible. You can see where we come from as a people, where we come from as a religion, as a society. So it's really beautiful to be not just in Israel, but in a lot of the Middle East.
Yeah, yeah. So if I can ask you to help me with something, I'm spending most of my time now making sure that we don't have a civil war in America like we did in Lebanon. And I have a plan. I'm writing a book about it. How do we avoid that? Because I sometimes, even although that's my number one mission, I get involved in debates with people on the other side that I think they're not salvageable. So how do we work in that middle of the bell curve so that we don't have a civil war in America? Now that we know the divisions are very deep, and then back to Charlie, um, the other side is beginning to use murder. So how do we? I mean, do you have any advice? Because it's something I strongly believe in. I can't have this happen to my new country. I just can't.
My first observation is America may be young. We're celebrating our 250th birthday next year, but we've been through a lot. We have been through a civil war. We have been through actual insurrections that the government sent military forces to put down. We have had these deep divisions in society that have resulted in the assassinations of multiple presidents, of multiple political figures. This is not new in our country. Even what we see today, protests on the streets or the riots of 2 years ago, it's cyclical. We have been there before. And there's nothing in my mind that says that we are so in a position now that we cannot get out of it, that we will not overcome it. And I think part of overcoming it is remembering that we all, for the most part, we all see the beauty of America, and we may not agree on specific policies, and we may not agree on some things that we firmly believe that one is right and one is wrong. But in America, there's always been that spirit of compromise. That's what's made America successful. From day one, this republic was set up so that everyone has a voice, so that even when you're not in the majority power, you do have influence into policies. You do have your rights. You do have your constitutional rights. And I think where we go from here, what we need to do to keep our democracy thriving is to not limit those rights. We want to be sure that we maintain our Constitution, that we uphold those crucial amendments that define our freedoms. Because once we start playing with that, and here I share criticism for the right and the left, when you want to narrow speech, when you want to penalize people for what they're thinking or what they're feeling, that's what drives the division that goes into violence. We need to remember that we can disagree about things and passionately, but those disagreements can't take someone's life. Those disagreements should not result in the type of violence that will result in all of us losing, if not our lives, then our rights. So we have to be mindful. We may not agree with people. We may not like what they're saying, but we have to respect the right to say it in an orderly, proper manner. We don't want the violence that we've seen with some of these protests, but people should be allowed to exercise their rights. And I think that's the basic thing that maintains our democracy, the respect for law and order, even when we don't agree with the other people's perspective. And yes, we've seen that jeopardized, whether it's through politicized prosecutions or whether it's through ideas to limit what's said on TV. We have to be careful not to go down that road. We have to preserve our rights at all costs.
That beautifully said. I when I was running for governor, people would talk a lot about the amendments and the Constitution, and after discussing this with several voters, to me the Constitution is not a la carte, right? It's not an a la carte menu. It's a prefix. It's like the Bible, this is it. And you need to do everything you can. And this is a plea to like you say, the majority of Americans who believe in this, is that we have a great system and a great republic, as I think Franklin said, if we can keep it. And I think that's what we should fight to keep it. And that, like you said, that means sometimes we're going to hear things we don't like to hear, but it's okay. That's what it's all about. And again, you can go down every single one of the items in the Constitution. So I wish for civics to come back in school. If they could just give us 1 hour of civics every 2 days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, people would, our kids would learn. And it's something I also want to work on, which is people to understand and appreciate what they have. It takes someone like you who's traveled around, who's seen things, and it takes someone like me who comes from outside to realize what a special place we have and why we should be fighting for it. So, I want to give you the last word here. Words of wisdom, advice, as we navigate the next critical, I think, 6 months to 12 months here.
Every vote matters. When I'm asked about Supreme Court cases or political issues, it comes back to, you need to be involved in the process. The Supreme Court has said so many times, they're not going to second guess Congress or the president. We elected these people. It's our responsibility to know who we're voting for, to make informed choices, and to be active in the process. We can't just complain that, the court needs to fix it or Congress needs to do something. Ultimately, it's on us. And your point about civics is 100% where we should be focused on. We need to remember that we have a voice and we need to use it. And the most important thing we can do is to vote, to be a part of the process.
That's great conclusion. Such a pleasure to have you. I'm going to buy the book, and then I'll send it to you to sign it for me after I read it. And please, I would love to stay in touch. I think we have a lot of the same goals in mind. I have something I might be inviting you to. I'll be doing in October, and let's just continue from there.
Absolutely, it was such a pleasure, such a privilege. I think your thinking is outstanding, and I look forward to staying in touch and being with you again.
Same. Feel the same way. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend.
You as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.